Hello everyone. Today we'll talk about covenants and their role in loan agreements. What are covenants and why they are needed? Through the credit relationship, the lender is faced with a credit risk, the risk of default of the loan and non-repayment of the interest by the borrower. Loan repayment depends on the borrower's ability and willingness to repay the debt. There are many factors that contribute to credit risk. This includes the competitive position of the borrower, his financial condition, the situation of the economy as a whole, the quality of the company's management, and others. By entering into a loan agreement, the lender seeks to limit the influence of these factors by including additional conditions in the agreement, which are called covenants. Covenant is such a contractual obligation by virtue of which one of the parties undertakes to perform certain actions, or on the contrary, undertakes not to perform certain actions during the term of the loan agreements. In the field of lending, the use of covenants is primarily due to the lender's desire to minimize its risks in the event that the borrower fails to fulfill its obligation under the loan agreement. Like a pledge or surety, covenants are also designed to ensure that the borrower is properly performing its obligations under the loan. It's worth mentioning that the covenants are selected by the lender for each borrower individually, taking into account the peculiarities of the borrower's business and taking into account the result of the analysis of his documents. There is no strict set of typical covenants that must be applied to all borrowers. There are several approaches to classifying covenants. Greenbaum and Taker divide the covenants into four groups. The first is positive covenants. They imply the performance of a certain action on the part of the borrower. For example, about maintaining a sufficient level of equity capital by the borrower or maintaining the composition of the management. The second group is limiting conditions. Such covenants restrict the borrower from taking certain actions. For example, limiting the amount of dividends that the borrower can pay to its shareholders in order to maintain liquidity of the company for payments to the lender, as well as restriction on the purchase of non-core assets. The third group, negative covenants, prohibit the borrower from certain actions without prior agreement with the lender. For example, a ban on the consolidation of legal entities into one company or the sale of assets. Default provisions are those cases in which, according to the loan agreement, Goldfinch has the right to immediately demand an early repayment of the loan. For example, late repayment on a loan, bankruptcy proceedings, liquidation of a borrower's business, violation of any statements made by the borrower at the time of the loan, as well as violation of the covenants themselves. At Goldfinch Academy, we're offered a different system for classifying covenants by type. The first type is financial covenants, that is, such covenants that are based on financial statements. Second, portfolio covenants, and the third is information covenants. There are other covenant classification systems, but they are globally similar to the two discussed in this video. Let's take a closer look at the financial covenants. And using a specific example, consider the covenant associated with the loan-to-collateral ratio. The microfinance company, Vector Limited, attracted a loan in the amount of 1 million USDC through Goldfinch, while the agreement provides for the provision of security for the loan in the amount of 1,200,000 USDC. We have a covenant in the loan agreement that the loan-to-collateral ratio should not exceed 1. Let's see what this means in the calculation formula. The loan amount must be divided by the amount of the collateral. In our case, we divide 1 million by 1,200,000 and get a coefficient of 0.83, and in this case, the conditions of the covenant are met because the final coefficient turned out to be less than 1, which means that everything is fine. But if, for example, during the term of the agreement, the amount of collateral decreased, for example, it became less than a million, then this ratio will increase and exceed 1, which will mean that the covenant is not fulfilled, and the lender will have the right to apply certain penalties to the borrower, responsibility according to the contract. Other examples of financial covenants include keeping the value of net assets at a certain level, preservation of a certain ratio of borrowed and owned funds of the borrower's company, maintaining a certain level of capitalization, maintaining a certain level of funds and accounts, as well as other covenants that require maintaining a certain level of quality in the financial condition at the borrower's company. Portfolio covenants. Let's look at specific examples of what portfolio covenants are. The first covenant is based on the proportion of loans overdue for a certain number of days. Typically 30, 60, and 90 days are considered. This covenant stipulates that the size of the share of loans issued in the borrower's portfolio that are overdue for a specified number of days should not exceed a specific percentage. Let's say the share of loans overdue by 30 days should not exceed 5%, overdue by 60 days 3%, and 90 days overdue 2%. And the borrower violates this covenant at least on one of the points, then the lender has the right to apply penalties in relation to the borrower. The next portfolio covenant is based on the size of the share of default loans. Similar to the previous example, but here we are no longer talking about a delay, but about those cases when the loan funds were not returned at all. For example, the covenant may stipulate the share of such loan should not exceed 3%. Another portfolio covenant is maintaining the volume of the borrower's loan portfolio. For example, a Goldfinch borrower must have a specific number of loans issued to its borrowers at each time the agreement is in effect. The next type is information covenants. As a rule, they are of the positive type, that is, when the borrower must perform certain actions. In particular, provide the lender with financial statements, including those that have passed an external audit. For example, portfolio reporting, so that the lender knows the portfolio indicators of the borrower that are of interest to him. The type of covenant also includes information about commercial disputes and legal proceedings, as well as information about any other unfulfilled obligation of the company taking out a loan from Goldfinch, which may serve as an indicator of well-being of the borrower. In conclusion, a few words about responsibility for violation of the covenants. It should be noted that the effectiveness of covenants significantly depends on the consequences of the violation by the borrower. It is clear that the covenant for the violation of which provides for the return of the entire loan amount will be executed with much greater precision than covenants which are subject to minor fines. What are penalties for violation of the covenants? Fine. Quite admissible for violation of the information covenant. For example, the borrower violates the deadline for submitting a notice of litigation and provided it 2 days later than the deadline. For failure to provide such notifications, the loan agreement may provide for the right of the lender to demand the return of the entire loan amount. However, since the borrower did provide the information, albeit with a delay, such a violation is not serious enough to demand the return of the entire loan amount, and the lender may impose a fine. In addition to a fine, there may be liability in the form of an increase in the interest rate on the loan. Suppose that the borrower had to maintain a certain level of capital in a company's account, but could not provide this, and at the moment the amount turned out to be 10% less. In this case, the agreement may provide that the lender has the right to increase the interest rate on the loan. Providing additional collateral occurs quite often. For example, if a volatile asset is selected as a collateral and its value has fallen down below the required value, then within a week the borrower is obliged to provide additional collateral in order to restore the amount of its value, which is provided for in the loan agreement. The next option, and the most severe, is the early return of the entire amount of the debt. It is used for violation of the most important and severe covenants. For example, if the number of loans issued falls significantly without compelling external reasons, which give reasons to believe that the funds issued on a loan are not in use for their declared purpose. That's all for me. Thanks. Until the next time. Bye.